Welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. The show covering all things health, wellness, culture, and more. The show for all of us who aren't old, we're better. Each week, we'll interview superstars, experts, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, all related to this wonderful experience of getting better, not just older. Now, here's your host, the award-winning Paul Vogelzang.
Welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates Art of Living interview series on radio and podcast. I'm Paul Vogelzang, and today we embark on a journey to one of the most mysterious and elusive places on Earth, North Sentinel Island, through the eyes of renowned historian, essayist, Smithsonian Associate, and journalist Adam Goodheart. Our guest today, Adam Goodheart, is here to discuss his latest book, The Last Island, Discovery, Defiance, and the Most Elusive Tribe on Earth, a profound exploration of a world that has resisted the tides of modernity and globalization. This is an amazing episode. You probably know the story, but in 2018, the world was captivated by the tragic story of a young American missionary who met his fate on the shores of North Sentinel Island, killed by the very people he sought to reach. This small island, nestled in the Andaman archipelago, is home to the Sentinelese, a tribe that has lived in near total isolation for centuries, shunning all contact with the outside world. Their story, however, is not just one of isolation, but of defiance, resilience, and a profound desire to remain untouched by the external forces that have reshaped the world around them. Smithsonian Associate Adam Goodheart, a historian whose work has graced the pages of National Geographic, The Atlantic, and The New York Times, has spent years studying and writing about the intersections of history, culture, and identity. In The Last Island, our guest today, Smithsonian Associate Adam Goodheart, weaves a narrative that is both historical and deeply personal, taking us through the centuries of interactions, often fraught and tragic, between the island's inhabitants and those who have attempted to bridge the divide. Today, we'll delve into the rich tapestry of stories that Adam has uncovered, from the Victorian photographers and imperial adventurers to modern-day anthropologists who have been drawn to North Sentinel Island's enigmatic shores. We'll explore the ethical complexities of interacting with isolated tribes, the lessons learned from colonial encounters, and the broader implications of modernity encroaching on these last bastions of traditional ways of life. As we navigate these compelling narratives, we'll also reflect on the broader questions of cultural preservation, autonomy, and the right to self-determination. What can we, as a global society, learn from the Sentinelese people and their steadfast commitment to their way of life? How do we balance the thirst for knowledge and connection with the respect for autonomy and privacy? Join us as we embark on this thought-provoking exploration with Smithsonian Associate Adam Goodheart and uncover the stories that lie at the heart of his new book, The Last Island, Discovery, Defiance, and the Most Elusive Tribe on Earth. This episode promises to be a profound journey into the depths of human resilience, cultural defiance, and the enduring mysteries of one of the world's last truly isolated communities.
The name North Sentinel Island may already ring a bell for many people, because about 5 years ago, a young American traveler swam onto a remote beach in the Indian Ocean and was killed by naked islanders wielding bows and arrows. This young man's name was John Allen Chow. He was a 26-year-old evangelical Christian, a graduate of Oral Roberts University, who had come with the intention of converting the native inhabitants of a place he referred to as Satan's last stronghold. And that brief proselytizing mission, which included reading to the natives from the book of Genesis in English from a waterproof Bible that he brought with him to the island, failed to win any souls for Christianity, but his visit did bestow on the islanders another peculiarly 21st century sort of immortality, which is that within just a few days, the fact of their existence went viral worldwide. And millions of people were astonished to hear that such a place could still exist in our time, an island with inhabitants who live in near total isolation from the rest of the planet and who defend their territory with bows and arrows against would-be invaders. And that's the subject of my book, The Last Island, which I'll be speaking about to a Smithsonian audience on June 20th. Type North Sentinel Island into a search engine today, and you can spend weeks reading articles, listening to podcasts, and skimming through blog entries, subreddits, and social media posts. Type North Sentinel Island into a search engine today, and you can spend weeks reading articles, listening to podcasts, and skimming through blog entries, subreddits, and social media posts. You can zoom in close on images of the island taken from satellites, helicopters, and passing airliners. The Sentinelese have a 7,000-word Wikipedia entry, 2 different Facebook pages, several spoof social media accounts, North Sentinel Island Department of Tourism, North Sentinel Island High School Marching Band, and almost 250,000 Google results. They're featured in hundreds of YouTube videos with a cumulative total of more than 100 million views. The vast majority of these search results date from after November 21st, 2018, which was the day that the news of John Chow's death became public. Within less than 24 hours, the story was making news in outlets around the world and blowing up on social media. A few of Chow's fellow evangelicals mourned him as a martyr, a fresh-faced missionary who burned with passion for the gospel of Christ. But most of the Twitter tweeters, Facebook posters, and Instagrammers saw his death as a well-earned comeuppance for religious bigotry, for tourist stupidity, for Western arrogance, for cultural imperialism, for habitat encroachment, or for all of the above. Eventually, Chow received the dubious honor of a Darwin Award, which recognizes those who supposedly improve the human gene pool by removing themselves from it with a feat of spectacular folly or incompetence. Resting in his distant, unmarked grave, the young man became far more vivid in death than he had ever been in life. A victim, a villain, a martyr, a joke. As for the Sentinelese themselves, they became a meme without, at least in the eyes of the world, ever leaving the Stone Age. By November 23rd, more than 4,000 people had posted spoof Google and Facebook reviews of North Sentinel Island, many resurrecting the age-old depiction of the Andamanese as cannibals. The food wasn't that good. My right leg was supposed to be perfectly boiled, but it was still a bit raw. Many of their fellow humans hailed the islanders as heroes, staunch self-exiles from an interconnected world, the planet's most committed practitioners of digital detox. A few dozen naked tribesmen with handmade bows and arrows seemed somehow more powerful, more authentically human than all those billions of other flabby earthlings clutching iPhones in their hands.
That, of course, was our guest today, author of the new book, Smithsonian Associate Adam Goodheart, reading from The Last Island, Discovery, Defiance, and the Most Elusive Tribe on Earth. Join us now as we welcome to the Not Old Better Show Smithsonian Associates interview series, Smithsonian Associate Adam Goodheart. Adam Goodheart, welcome to the program.
Paul, it's great being here. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. The Last Island is wonderful. Congratulations on this work. All the research, the writing is fantastic. I really am excited to talk to you about this book. It's got some personal relevance to me and my family that I'm excited about, certainly for many, many others. But let's start backing up into your Smithsonian Associates presentation and tell us a little bit about what you'll be telling us there. Lots of great images in the book, and maybe you'll be using Zoom to kind of share some of those images, but you've been generous to read. Maybe expand on that and tell us a little bit more about your presentation.
I'm going to be sharing my book, which is about a place that's famously the most isolated population on Earth, North Sentinel Island, in the upper right-hand corner of the Indian Ocean, strung between Burma and Sumatra in the Andaman Islands. You might ask, how does someone write an entire book about a place with which there's no contact, or with which outsiders who have tried to make contact have often ended up dead on the beach at the hands of Sentinelese bowmen? And the answer is that my book is a work of both history and travel. So I did travel twice to the Andaman Islands. I went there in 1998 and actually had my own close encounter with the Sentinelese coming down to the beach with their bows and arrows and spears. And then I went back there again in 2020, just a couple of weeks before the pandemic shut the world down, and experienced the way that the net of the outside world had drawn even tighter around this isolated place in the intervening decades. So part of my book is really travel, story, and adventure, and part of it is history, because I also explore the question of how this island came to be the last place on Earth that has a population living completely out of touch with the rest of the human species. And some of the complicated, dark, twisted, and fascinating stories of the imperial contacts with other Andamanese in the 19th century, in the days of the British Empire, stories of imperialism and conquest and even genocide in that part of the world that I think do a lot to explain why the Sentinelese have wished to maintain their independence and their isolation for so long.
Thank you for that. And I make reference to my own personal situation, not to personalize this too much, but my wife and I have a son who served an evangelical mission in a very remote place in the world, the islands of Micronesia, Palau, and Yap, of all places. And it's interesting to experience that through his eyes, just as I did in the book. And missionaries still exist, still go to these places, still proselytize, absolutely, but not in such a remote location as the North Sentinel Island. And I thought that the missionary aspect of this set the tone so nicely for the rest of what happens in the book, because it is this story of travel, but also of a world encroaching on itself. I watched as my own son carried these messages forward, and some were embraced, some were pushed away. And I think that's the way of the world. Yet my own son was not met with a quiver full of arrows. So that's, right, I think, what makes this very unique. And you probably have heard from other parents of missionaries or other missionaries. I wonder what they've said to you about that aspect of all of this.
I suspect that if your son had known that he was going to be met with a quiver full of arrows, that he would not have actually gone to Yap or Micronesia or the other places that he went to as a missionary. And certainly there are many missionaries who go out and do good work in the world. But in this case, I think it's clear that the Sentinelese had, as it were, made their foreign policy very, very clear, abundantly clear over the years, when they had come down and confronted very firmly and kept it at arm's length anyone who wanted to land on their island. They made it clear that they did not want interlopers. And in fact, John Chow was not killed the first time that he tried to land on the island, but the third time. And the islanders really showed great mercy and forbearance. The first time that he landed, they just sort of confronted him verbally and jeered at him and insulted him and made gestures that made it clear that they wanted him to leave. The second time, a young boy actually came up and shot an arrow, not at Chow directly, but at the waterproof Bible that he was holding, and the arrow went into the Bible. And clearly this boy could have just shot Chow himself if he had wanted to, but chose to do that as a warning instead. And so when Chow did go back the third time, he pretty much knew that he was going to be killed, and he wrote in his journal that he expected that to happen and wrote a farewell to his friends and his family. So it's a very poignant story, but really my book isn't very much about the story of Chow as an individual. There's been some very good work done on that, including a National Geographic documentary called The Mission that came out late last year that I was very involved with. And it's an excellent portrayal of an investigation of Chow's deep story and motivation and complicated brief life. But what I'm really interested in more is this phenomenon of the last place in the world where this experience of the first encounter between human groups has been playing itself out, and how it is that the so-called age of discovery is coming to an end at this one remote place at the dawn of the 21st century. So my presentation for the Smithsonian is really going to take the participants deep into history. I'm going to share some incredible imagery that I found, everything from 15th century maps that depict this part of the world to some amazing 19th century photographs that I found in archives in Britain and in India that were taken not for the most part on North Sentinel Island itself, but on other islands in the Andaman archipelago by 19th century British explorers who were making contacts of their own with these native people who lived at that time on other islands as well, and have since shrunk to just a couple of small populations on North Sentinel and elsewhere. And some of these photographs are just aesthetically gorgeous, and they're also extremely poignant when you think about the fate of the Andamanese in the century and a half since they were taken.
Hi, it's Paul. Do you love entertaining, informative, eclectic, insightful programs about culture, health, science, life, and everything Smithsonian? As part of our Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast, we're introducing you to the new Smithsonian Associates streaming series. Smithsonian, a nonprofit organization, is excited to present this new aspect of their 55 years as the world's largest museum-based educational program. Join us from the comfort of your home as we periodically interview Smithsonian Associate guest speakers. Our audience here on radio and podcast can explore our website for more information, links, and details at notold-better.com. Thanks, everybody. Again, congratulations on this book. The title is The Last Island by Adam Goodheart, Smithsonian Associate, and our guest today. What did you discover in your research and in your travels that really surprised you? I mean, you had an idea of what you might report on and what you might tell, but going to a place like this is so eye-opening and maybe shocking at the same time. Did you have a similar reaction?
It's a place that's both shocking for its isolation and shocking for its lack of isolation. So on the one hand, it was an incredible experience, as I will describe more in my talk and as I describe more in the book, an incredible experience to look out and at a distance of just a few hundred yards, see these people standing there with their naked except for the bows and arrows and spears that they were holding, and feel like I was looking across the millennia, a different time in human civilization. But of course, I was not looking across the millennia. And these human beings and their culture are as much part of the 21st century world as we are here on this podcast. They're as much citizens of our globe today as anyone else is. And they live very much surrounded by, hemmed in on all sides by that connected global culture, the same that we live hemmed in by it, and really to a degree that's surprising when you think of the way that they've managed to hold their own civilization so intact for so long. So there are multiple flights that pass overhead every day, commercial airliners on their way to and from mainland India. All of the detritus of our civilization washes up on the beaches. While I was there in 2020, high-speed internet was being installed to the Andaman archipelago. So probably Sentinelese have pretty good cell reception on their island, even though they probably don't know it. So they really are people who exist both in a sense out of time, but also in a sense very much caught in the mesh of our times. And it's unclear how much longer they'll be able to go on the way that they are now.
Our guest, of course, is Smithsonian Associate Adam Goodheart, who has written the wonderful new book, The Last Island. Adam Goodheart will be presenting at Smithsonian Associates coming up. Please check out our show notes today for more information about Adam Goodheart, all of his work, his new book, and details about his upcoming Smithsonian Associate presentation. The book, as I say, is just wonderful and getting great reviews too, Adam. I was so impressed to read that the Washington Post says a deft combination of adventure, history, reportage, and elegy. Lovely. I just thought that was nice, tight, concise compliment for you and your book. Again, congratulations on such fantastic work. I personally am drawn to this for some of the reasons that I cited, but I also love this story that this could still exist in our world today. As you point out, the archipelago with high-speed internet just kind of coming close to their own island. And you've alluded to this. Do you think it's possible that they're just going to keep all of us away successfully, or do you think it's just over for them?
When most right-thinking people consider their situation and consider the message that they've sent loud and clear that they want to be left alone, I think most people say, well, they really should be allowed to maintain their isolation that they clearly prize so highly. And in fact, that's exactly what the Indian government is enforcing. India actually controls the Andaman Islands. They're an offshore territory of the Republic of India. And so the Indian government has Navy and Coast Guard patrols that circle the island and make sure that nobody lands there. And what that young American missionary did when he landed and attempted to make contact with the natives was in fact highly illegal under Indian law. And even what I did in 1998, when I simply circled the island in a small boat and saw the natives from a distance, that as well was highly illegal at the time and just as illegal now. I think there's a lot of merit to that argument. On the other hand, it's probably pretty far-fetched to think that the Sentinelese can simply maintain their isolation and survive indefinitely on their own. For one thing, whether or not anyone from the outside actually sets foot there, our civilization is encroaching in all kinds of ways on theirs, of course, through climate change, through habitat destruction, extinction or dwindling of the species that they depend on as hunter-gatherers, through the artifacts of our civilization that are washing ashore. You can see elsewhere in the Andaman Islands, and I record in my book, the vast amounts of plastic washing up onto beaches that we have to assume is washing up onto the shores of North Sentinel as well. And in fact, one person I interviewed for the book actually saw some Sentinelese using a blue plastic tarp to make into the roof of one of their huts. So our civilization is encroaching upon theirs in any case. We also know that, especially as in the wake of John Chow's death, the island drew a whole lot of media attention. Perhaps it's only a matter of time before others try to land there and make their own unauthorized contact, which the Indian government patrols may or may not be able to stop from happening. So thinking about how technologically advanced civilizations should be in touch with hunter-gatherer groups around the world, with the remaining small hunter-gatherer groups around the world. There are others in addition to the Sentinelese, even if no one lives in as much isolation as the Sentinelese do. There are other isolated hunter-gatherer groups. It has been argued by some anthropologists that really the best course of action would be some kind of very limited, controlled, careful degree of contact in order to make sure that the people know that when they're ready, that there are, for instance, doctors who are waiting to help them if epidemic should strike, say if microbes should find their way onto the island from the outside world in a way that is all too possible, that they would be able to get help, that if there were some kind of climate-related disaster, that they would be able to count on help from the outside. So that argument is made as well, but it's very hard to predict what the out of any of these scenarios might be, unfortunately, until after it's happened. So perhaps only the future will tell.
I'm old enough that I remember as a boy the stories about Ishi, the Indian in Northern California, who I believe was part of a Miwok tribe, and his exposure into our culture resulted in illness ultimately, and it was attributed to his death. I wonder if that balance struck you as you were doing this work, and if you came across some of that in your research.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I hope my book is about is the way that different, fundamental, and sometimes contradictory elements of our nature as a species, of our nature as human beings, are expressed through the story of North Sentinel Island. There's one deep-rooted human tendency towards preservation of oneself and one's group, obviously, and preservation of one's own culture and defense of one's community. But then there are other human instincts that sometimes go at cross purposes. So there is a fundamental human instinct to connect. There is, some anthropologists argue, a fundamental human drive to make contact with other groups and learn from them and develop new technologies and understanding, knowledge, connections, form alliances. And so perhaps those two fundamental human qualities or instincts are fated to collide on the shores of North Sentinel. Perhaps they're colliding already.
Well, Adam Goodheart has been our guest today, author of this wonderful new book, The Last Island. Smithsonian Associate Adam Goodheart will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates. Please check out our show notes so that you can learn more about Adam's upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation and then this wonderful book, The Last Island. Adam, what's next for you? We'd love to have you back. If you're going to do more work that's related to the North Sentinelese, that would be fantastic to hear more of. But as you do more stories and more research, of course, in your role as historian, we'd love to have you back and talk further. Anything you can share with us about what's coming up?
Thanks, Paul. Sure. Yeah, I've gone back to the era of my first book, which is something very different. My first book was on the American Civil War. It was called 1861, The Civil War Awakening. So my next book, the one that I'm midway through right now, is called 1865. It's about the end of the American Civil War. In some ways, it covers some similar ground because a lot of The Last Island, as you'll recall, is actually set in the 19th century and that world of the British Empire. So I'm back to exploring a different aspect of the 19th century in my book, 1865. But that's another couple of years away from when it'll be hitting the bookshelves.
Please do keep us posted. And I know that the Smithsonian is always interested in those kinds of subjects, as am I in our audience. So thank you, Adam Goodheart, for your time. Thanks again for this wonderful book, The Last Island. Links and much more in our show notes. But Adam, we'll see you at Smithsonian Associates. Have a great rest of your day. And again, congrats on this wonderful book.
Thanks, Paul. I look forward to the event. Have a great day.
My thanks to Adam Goodheart for all of his wonderful work, his generosity in reading today, and this fantastic book, The Last Island, Discovery, Defiance, and the Most Elusive Tribe on Earth. Adam Goodheart will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates coming up. Please check our show notes today for more details on his presentation there at Smithsonian Associates. We are grateful for the Smithsonian team and all they do to support the show. Thanks as well to executive producer and sound designer Sam Henniger for all of his work. Thanks to you, our wonderful audience on radio and podcast. Please be well, be safe, and let's talk about better, the Not Old Better Show. Thanks, everybody. We will see you next week.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. To find out more about all of today's stories or to view our extensive back catalog of previous shows, simply visit notold-better.com. Join us again next time as we deep dive into some of the most fascinating real-life stories from across the world, all focused on this wonderful experience of getting better, not just older. Let's talk about better. The Not Old Better Show.
Hi, one final thing. Please check out our website for this episode and all episodes at notold-better.com, or subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, and be sure to check out your local radio stations to find out more about the Not Old Better Show on podcast and radio. You can find us all over social media. Our Twitter feed is Not Old Better, and we're on Instagram at Not Old Better too. The Not Old Better Show is a production of NOBS Studios. I'm Paul Vogelsang, and I hope you'll join me again next time to talk about better. The Not Old Better Show. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.